A day that should have meant justice. May 1st, 2023. A date that for many should have symbolized the triumph of accountability. Jesse McFadden was scheduled to appear in court that morning. Another opportunity for the justice system to acknowledge a pattern of dangerous behavior and finally intervene in a meaningful way. But that appearance never happened. Instead, what unfolded that day in the small, quiet community of Henrietta, Oklahoma, was the kind of tragedy that no one could have imagined. Law enforcement officers, expecting to find a missing defendant, arrived at McFadden's rural property with paperwork in hand. But the silence that greeted them was thick, unnatural. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Inside the home and across the surrounding grounds, officers uncovered a scene of devastating loss. Multiple lives had been taken in a matter of moments. Lives of people who had once laughed, loved, and trusted. Among the victims were McFadden's wife, Holly Guess, her 3 children, and 2 teenage girls who had been visiting the home for what should have been a joyful weekend. McFadden himself was also found deceased on the property. The tragedy was not just about one man's violent end. It was about a system that failed to act decisively, a community that was unaware of the danger among them, and families left shattered by loss. What should have been a day of reckoning became one of remembrance, heartbreak, and urgent reflection. Act 2, The Missing. How silence turned to fear. It started like any ordinary Monday. Schools opened, bells rang, and teachers took attendance. But something was off. Tiffany, Michael, and Riley, 3 siblings from the Guess family, didn't arrive. Neither did Webster and Britney Brewer, 2 teenage girls who had stayed the weekend at the McFadden home. Parents grew anxious. The usual morning texts went unanswered. Phone calls rang and rang. Some messages raised immediate red flags. Ivy's mother later noted that one message sent from her daughter's phone just didn't sound like Ivy at all. There was something robotic, disconnected, almost as if it had been copied and pasted. The casual tone felt forced. As parents grew frantic, Jesse McFadden was also notably absent from court, where he had a scheduled appearance related to prior charges. His failure to appear only deepened the growing sense of dread. Authorities quickly launched a welfare check. What began as a procedural visit soon turned into a tragic discovery. Officers entered the McFadden property bracing for a confrontation. Instead, they uncovered a grim scene that would leave seasoned investigators shaken for life. The home was still, the air heavy, and the truth lay silently in plain sight. 7 lives lost in a place that was meant to be a safe haven. The house was no longer a home. It was a place of mourning, a place where dreams and futures had come to a sudden and tragic end. Act 3, The Victims, lives that deserved more time. Holly, Guess 35, had hoped for a second chance at life. After a previous marriage ended, she believed she was rebuilding, giving her children a stable home and a new start. She loved deeply, gave generously, and tried her best to hold her family together despite personal struggles. Her children were at different stages of life, each with their own identity. 13-year-old Tiffany was stepping into adolescence, a mix of curiosity and creativity. Michael, at 15, was in that in-between stage, no longer a child, not yet an adult, possibly dreaming about driving or finding his passion. Riley, the oldest at 17, was nearing graduation, maybe thinking about college, first jobs, or future goals. Despite their differences, they were close-knit. They shared laughter, inside jokes, and the normal messiness of growing up in a blended family. Also lost that day were 2 guests, young girls full of potential. Ivy Webster loved animals, especially horses, and was known for her kind heart and energy. She played softball and was a dependable friend. Britney Brewer had big dreams. She wanted to become a teacher or maybe a veterinarian. Just recently, she had been selected for a local pageant, a moment of recognition that made her beam with pride. Each life was unique. Each had hopes, plans, and people who loved them, and none of them knew the full reality of the man living under the same roof. Act 4, A House of Secrets. As investigators moved through the McFadden residence, they discovered more than just physical evidence. What they found revealed a chilling atmosphere of control and manipulation. Parts of the home had been altered, modified in ways that suggested calculated and deeply disturbing behavior. There were restraint devices bolted to furniture, locks placed in unusual locations, and security systems that seemed less about safety and more about dominance. Some rooms, once meant for comfort, bore marks of something far more sinister. Devices were seized, laptops, cell phones, external drives, each possibly holding clues to McFadden's state of mind and actions leading up to the tragedy. It quickly became evident that this was not the result of a spontaneous breakdown. It was premeditated. Among Jesse's belongings was a notebook with the names of the victims methodically written down. That discovery confirmed what many feared. This was not a moment of madness. It was a deliberate act. Outside, the bodies were found in separate areas, some near a barn, others deeper into the wooded property. The layout seemed intentional, as though even in his final moments, McFadden wanted control over how the tragedy would unfold. Act 5. A history ignored. Jesse McFadden had a criminal past, one that should have raised alarms. A previously convicted offender, he had already served time, yet managed to secure early release. Despite prior warnings, troubling patterns, and complaints from victims, he walked free. After his release, he married Holly Guess and blended into the community. To outsiders, he appeared reformed, a husband, a stepfather, someone starting over. But behind that facade was a web of lies. He concealed his past from Holly's family, manipulated parole records, and even allegedly hired someone to cover up his background. Days before the tragic events, he sent disturbing messages to a former victim, blaming others for the consequences of his own actions. He even impersonated others through text messages, likely trying to stall discovery and delay response. This wasn't a man on the run. It was someone attempting to write the final chapter on his own terms, no matter who else it harmed in the process. Act 6. Every system failed. The system didn't just fail once, it failed repeatedly. Jesse McFadden was flagged numerous times by victims, by former inmates, and through his own behavior. But no intervention was strong enough. No safeguard was in place to stop him from living with minors or reoffending. He was granted freedom, not because he had proven himself trustworthy, but because of procedural leniency. Credits for good behavior, checkboxes ticked, warnings ignored. As early as 2017, victims had begged for stronger consequences. Their voices went unheard. By the time authorities realized something was wrong, the opportunity to prevent tragedy had passed. The signs were there, but they were missed, overlooked, or dismissed until it was far too late. Act 7. Control, not chaos. Mental health experts and criminal psychologists reviewing the case concluded that this wasn't a momentary loss of control. It was a final assertion of dominance. Jesse McFadden had spent years creating an environment of isolation, secrecy, and control. He had reportedly monitored Holly's communications, distanced her from friends and family, and created a reality where he held all the power. With a court case approaching and public scrutiny increasing, he may have felt that his grip on his constructed world was slipping. In response, he didn't retreat. He acted, not from desperation, but from a belief that if he couldn't control the outcome of his life, he would control its ending. It was calculated, it was cruel, and it left an entire town shaken to its core. Act 8. Echoes of grief. In the days and weeks that followed, the community gathered in mourning. Vigils were held, tributes poured in, photos of smiling children, family dinners, school dances, and softball games became painful reminders of what was lost. But grief wasn't the only emotion. There was outrage at the missed warnings, at the broken system, and at the realization that this could have been prevented. Families had to live not only with the loss of their loved ones, but also with the haunting thought that the system meant to protect them had failed to act. In a tragic twist, some families were even allowed to visit the scene before it had been fully secured, an oversight that added to the trauma. What happened in Henrietta wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a systemic one. It was a reminder that evil doesn't always arrive in masks or in darkness. Sometimes it hides behind smiles, everyday routines, and neatly trimmed lawns.